What is going on, everyone? Welcome into Big Time Football Talk. So I wanted to touch on a few things on this episode. First thing, the Atlanta Falcons doing some more work as far as team building. They added Trey Flowers. He's a veteran corner, a guy that spent some time in Seattle. I think this is a nice move to Atlanta. You're adding depth in the secondary. I think this is a team that knows. Look, we invested a lot of assets on the offensive side of the ball. We're full bore, full gear in getting this offense rolling. We know that we're not going to solve all the issues necessarily on the defensive side of the ball this year. So, let's go out. Let's go out. Let's get Bud Dupree. Let's trade for Jeff Okuda. Let's trade for some known commodities. Let's bring in Mike Hughes, a guy that, despite not being a good tackler or not being a good overall player in the NFL, and it hasn't really necessarily worked out for him, he's a guy that is a pretty good tackler. Is a guy that can compete. So let's add some pieces on the defensive side of the ball because we're banking on our offense is going to be very good. We got Bijan Robinson. We drafted Matthew Bergeron, the offensive tackle, who's likely going to play guard at the next level. So we've invested and we have enough pieces to have a really dominant, an offense that could be dominant in the run game. So let's go out and get and add some more pieces on the defensive side of the ball. So yeah, it's the deal with Trey Flowers is it's a 1-year deal. Like I touched on, They in the draft they added Clark Phillips too from Utah, so I think we're just trying to add some depth. You got AJ Terrell is one of the best cornerbacks in football. I've talked about AJ Terrell on this channel a lot. He's one of my favorite players in the league, and so now with some depth and some talent, you're really making some noise on the defensive side of the ball. With some of these moves, even though these aren't really high-end guys, difference makers necessarily. You do if you run into injuries later in the year, at least you have a plan for that. So the next thing I thought it's always fun to look back and reflect on past consensus rankings. And what I wanted to do, I wanted to look back on past cornerback consensus rankings. So I wanted to look the last 5 years. This year, we haven't seen the guys in this year's class play in the NFL. So I wanted to look at the last 5 drafts, starting with 2018 NFL draft to 2022. So the 2018 NFL draft, consensus cornerback rankings for that draft. Where I'm going by NFL mock draft database. Obviously, I know there was a lot of different media outlets. Mock draft database, if you guys aren't familiar with this website, it just compiles consensus rankings using numerous amounts of like NFL draft websites, using their rankings, and then using a bunch of like mock drafts. So, like for example, Bryce Young was like the consensus number 1 for this past draft. And they use that based on how many, or like his average ranking based on all of them. So it came out to he was number 1, and there was times he was number 2, I think. But he was either 1 or 2. Will Anderson, I think, was 1 for a while, was 2. I think his lowest was number 3, but you kind of catch my drift. So it obviously was changing, but in the end, it was Bryce Young 1, I believe Will Anderson 2, and then it's C.J. Stroud at number 3. C.J. Stroud was up there at number 1 as well. But the 2018 cornerback classes, consensus rankings as followed: Denzel Ward from Ohio State, number 1. Josh Jackson from Iowa, number 2. Jair Alexander out of Louisville, 3. Mike Hughes, 4 out of UCF. Isaiah Oliver, 5. Carlton Davis, 6. Dante Jackson, 7. Some of the more notable guys. Let's start in Denzel Ward, a guy that's been pretty good for the Browns. This was a guy who he went high in the NFL draft. I forget exactly. Yeah, Denzel Ward ended up being the 4th overall pick in the NFL in the 2018 NFL draft by the Cleveland Browns, and it's really worked out nicely. Denzel Ward, really good corner, guy that really had a nice career overall at Ohio State, and he's really shown a lot of ability as far as making plays in the football and being an excellent man-to-man corner. Jair Alexander, number 3. So it turns out Jair Alexander has been maybe the best cornerback in football. Has had a few times where he's been graded like number 1 or 2 corner by Pro Football Focus. It's a guy that when he's healthy is a difference maker. Knows how to. It's a guy that you're really taking a serious risk as a quarterback when you throw his way. Alexander he has all the tools you want in a high-end elite corner in the National Football League, and his talent has been on full display, especially in the playoffs. He had the game where he picked off, was it a couple of years ago? I think he picked off Tom Brady 2 or 3 times. This is a dude that, he just, he's a star. And, he was a guy that, there was a small sample size, didn't have a lot of career starts at Louisville, but like in the NFL and also in college, he stepped up in big-time moments. In that 2016 game versus Clemson, Deshaun Watson, Lamar Jackson duel, Clemson, Louisville, Alexander picked off Deshaun Watson multiple times. So this is a guy that just makes big-time plays on the big-time stage, and he's an excellent corner in the NFL level. Mike Hughes, I just touched on earlier in this episode. Atlanta's got him. This guy that just is really underachieved in the NFL. Still a pretty good tackler. Still a guy that competes every week. You kind of know at this point what you're getting from Mike Hughes. Just a kind of a hustle guy who will make some tackles. Will fly around the football. Will give you effort. But he never really developed into necessarily like a star that they thought he could coming out of UCF. And then Isaiah Oliver, guy that's got some playing time early in his career in Atlanta, has really flashed some ability, but really has never kind of taken that next step as far as being more than like an above average starter. Carlton Davis, the next guy. Carlton Davis, a nice player, a guy that has been a key part in the Buccaneers secondary, key part to their success, has been a good player. Coming out, the question was his 40 time a little bit. Not the fastest guy in the world. I think ran in the 4.5s, but a guy that plays fast and kind of like Mike Hughes. He's a very aggressive tackler, a guy that just really gets after it. And very, very competitive football player Carlton Davis is. So the 2019 NFL Draft cornerback rankings consensus as followed. Greedy Williams, number 1 out of LSU. Number 2, Byron Murphy, coming out of Washington. Number 3, DeAndre Baker, coming out of Georgia. Rock Ya-Sin at 4 out of Temple. Julian Love, 5 out of Notre Dame. David Long, 6. Justin Lane, 7 out of Michigan State. Amani Uriwari, 8. So, Greedy Williams was the big-time talk. If you remember, coming out of this draft, it seemed like he was the consensus number 1 guy. A guy that had pretty much all the tools you look for in a corner. He ran low. He ran in the high 4.2s or low, or I think it was 4.3 flat, 4.3 he ran. A guy that's just very fast, a guy that's just has battled through some injuries and just, when he's been on the field, hasn't really played super well. And, his time in Cleveland kind of was summed up by, injuries and just lackluster play when he's been on the field. So, now Greedy Williams on the Eagles. We'll see what he can do with the Eagles. I think this is a good move acquiring Williams. Get some speed in the secondary. Obviously, this is a guy that, at this point, maybe does not have a whole lot of upside. Maybe the injuries have kind of hindered his ability to have success and really take a next step at this level. But we'll see. We'll see how that pans out for the Eagles. Number 2 guy is Byron Murphy. Byron Murphy, the guy that did some nice things in Arizona, primarily worked in the slot for the Cardinals. Murphy now with the Minnesota Vikings. DeAndre Baker, a guy that it just didn't really happen for him at the NFL or in the NFL. A guy that had some off the field issues. A talented player, had the size, kind of lacked some top end speed, is what hurt him a little bit. Rock Ya-Sin, guy that had some success with the Colts, but overall just a very, very average player. Julian Love, David Long. David Long is a guy that's had flashed some moments. Amani Oriwarie is a guy that played pretty well. Had a couple good years for Detroit, and then this year was not as good. And also down this list, I got to touch on Sean Murphy Bunting was further down this list. Murphy Bunting ended up going early second round at Tampa Bay, and he's been pretty good for him. No longer with the Buccaneers. I forget who picked him up, but he's had some nice moments. Stepped up big in the playoffs and in the Super Bowl a couple years ago. So, yeah, Murphy Bunting, been pretty solid player. Also, a guy that has battled some injuries, especially last year in 2021. So the 2020 cornerback rankings, this was an interesting year because Jeff Okudah was the consensus number one player. Okudah, a guy that had some decent a guy that played decent in Detroit when he was on the field, dealt with some injuries, Achilles injury in 2021. But yeah, Jeff Okudah really showed ability to make tackles, be a physical player, and really flashed early on in 2022. Had a really nice game against Justin Jefferson. But other than that, the injuries, he got the injury bug this year, and then it kind of hindered his play later in the season. Did fight back towards the end of the year and had some nice moments, but just overall it didn't work out for Jeff Okudah in Detroit. Kind of got buried in the depth chart in this offseason when they chose to sign Cam Sutton and Emmanuel Mosley. Ended up becoming the expendable guy in the secondary, so Detroit chose to move on, traded him for a fifth-round pick to Atlanta. So the next guy, this is a guy that very interesting player, C.J. Henderson. C.J. Henderson, if you remember, was the 9th overall pick by Jacksonville in the 2020 draft. Ended up being traded after just playing 8 games in 2020. Ended up being traded to Carolina in September of 2021. He was traded. Carolina traded tight end Dan Arnold in a 3rd-round pick in exchange for Jacksonville getting a 5th-round pick and C.J. Henderson. But the thing with C.J. Henderson is this year he started to get some more playing time. Was playing about maybe 40 to 60% of the snaps. But later in the season, you started to see him games where he was playing 90, and then even a couple games played 100% of the snaps. And you really see the raw athletic ability that made C.J. Henderson a top 10 pick. I mean, this guy that when he puts his burst and acceleration is second to none. I mean, and hip fluidity, movement, I mean, he just can flip his hips, can flip into zone coverage effortlessly, can come back, work back to the football. It's a guy that they played a lot of zone coverage with him and some off man, mostly because this is a guy that he does not have great play strength and does not necessarily, doesn't really excel in a press man-to-man role, even though I think he could do it and they might want to test him out more. He's a guy that, maybe will give up some catches underneath, but it's only a lot of times it was only for 4 or 5 yards. But I mean, the problem with C.J. Henderson, there was too many plays where it was just, bonehead penalties. Like a lot of times he was in position to make a play, he just did not turn around and make a play on the ball. And the Tampa Bay game later in the season gave up to some plays to Mike Evans. The one big play was like he was in phase and then he just kind of like almost got content with just being, with being close to him. I think he gets content with just being close to receiver, and he almost just keeps getting surprised that when the quarterback throws a good ball that, being a little behind him is not in a good position to make a play. I guess hopefully the more experience he gets, because the guy that, heads into the 4th year now, his 5th-year option was declined. You hope with C.J. Henderson, this is a guy that can learn from those mistakes and playing lackadaisical, that, hey, I shouldn't just be content with, being slightly behind the receiver, because now I'm at the NFL level, my closing speed, I'm not catching up with NFL receivers, and I need to just be all over the guy a lot of times to make a pass breakup, because the quarterback can put it right on the money. So you combine that, the adjustments like that, being a little bit more competitive man-to-man and improving as a tackler and playing with more sense of an urgency, I think will be key for C.J. Henderson. And this is a huge year for him because he's going to want to get paid next year in his 5th year. But, C.J. Henderson, very talented guy. And this is a guy that Carolina, it sounds like the coaching staff still believes in him, still trusts in him, still believe they can get the most out of a guy that was the former top 10 pick in the NFL draft. But yeah, you just can't have they can't have the mistakes, and he can't have the too many. He's got to get. They can't have too many more of those just tackles where he just kind of goes in nonchalant and just he doesn't necessarily whiff, but it just part of it I think he just misses against bigger guys because of his lack of strength. But I think sometimes though he can just if he used more of if he just breaks down, use more full strength, full toughness, and he can just at least slow the guy down instead of just kind of trying to go and chop the guy's leg and just missing. Not necessarily whiffing, but missing enough where the running back can just get back up to top speed. So that's what I noticed about C.J. Henderson. Christian Fulton was the third guy out of LSU. Christian Fulton's been a nice player for the Tennessee Titans. Really no complaint about Fulton's game at all. He's a guy that it doesn't necessarily have the traits to become maybe a legit shutdown corner at this level, but it's a nice player nonetheless for the Titans. A.J. Terrell was the consensus number 4, and that's what's funny because I went back and looked at where the media had A.J. Terrell before I looked at the consensus ranking, and I would say he was mostly like in the 3 through 6 range, 4 through 7, 3 through 6 ranking by most media outlets. So consensus ranking number 4 seems just about perfect for A.J. Terrell. But A.J. Terrell has been the best player of this draft class. He's just been outstanding. This guy that did have had a little bit of an injury problem this year, but when he's been on the field has been definitely a difference maker. You see his ability in man coverage, ability to make plays on the ball, intercept passes. He's an excellent tackler who really just brings it, and he's an ultimate competitor who will just keep coming back and getting after it. Number 5, Trevon Diggs. Trevon Diggs, you know the story. He's been pretty good with the Cowboys, but he's been a guy who's been feast or famine. There's plays where he gets burnt, and there's plays where he comes up with a big play interception. A couple years ago in 2021, had a 2021, he had a year with like 6-7 interceptions. Seemed like he was just always around the football. And as for the Cowboys, you hope there's just more of that play for Trevon Diggs. Jalen Johnson, another guy down this list. Johnson, a guy that has done pretty well for the Chicago Bears. So it's like 2021 cornerback class. Number 1, Patrick Surtain out of Alabama. Number 2, J.C. Horn, South Carolina. Number 3, Caleb Farley. 4, Greg Newsome. 5, Asante Samuel. 6, Afonso Melifonwu. 7, Tyson Campbell. Eric Stokes down there, Paulson Adebo, Aaron Robinson. Overall, this is a good class. This is a class that I remember scouting this class going into the season, and I really liked a lot of things about this class. I mean, first off, with Patrick Surtain now turned into one of the best corners in the NFL, and there was a big debate of him and Caleb Farley. Turns out Patrick Surtain would be the answer to that debate, or the answer to that question, who was better between those two guys. Surtain, excellent player. J.C. Horn was hurt last year, but this year when he played, flashed a lot of the ability he showed at South Carolina. A bigger, physical corner whose game has really translated nicely to the NFL. Caleb Farley, former first-round pick to the Titans. And the big question, the injury was a question for Caleb Farley. Had the Tiger Woods back injury. He's shown in the NFL that he's shown in the NFL that a lot of his ability in college, for some reason, just has not translated. I think a lot of times he looks like he's thinking too much. I think that's just part of the inexperience for Caleb Farley. Greg Newsome's a guy that's been pretty good for the Cleveland Browns. Asante Samuel Jr. has done some nice things for the Chargers. Tyson Campbell, early second-round pick by the Jacksonville Jaguars, a guy that's played a lot of good football for the Jags. And This is a guy that's a tremendous athlete. The big question of him coming out of college, where were the interceptions? Where was the ball or the big plays on the ball? But he's answered that question well in the NFL, and he's really taken his game to the next level. Eric Stokes, taken by Green Bay. He's done some nice things. This was a good cornerback class overall. I mean, obviously, Caleb Farley didn't really live up to the hype. Melifonwu has been underwhelming. Elijah Molden, they have him listed as a corner. He's played more of a safety. He's done some nice things for the Titans. And then this past draft, I'll touch on a few of the top guys. Ahmad Gardner. Sauce Gardner really lived up to the hype this past season. NFL defensive rookie of the year, a guy that his size, length, competitiveness really just shined at the next level. He's going to be a good corner for a long time in the National Football League. So that pick really worked out. The Jets taking him 4th overall. Derek Stingley Jr., number 3 overall to the Houston Texans. Stingley did flash some ability, but kind of like C.J. Gardner-Johnson. This is a guy that has all the ability, but kind of plays casually, kind of plays a little too lackadaisical, kind of just is almost too content at times with just wanting to just do his job and not necessarily taking the next step and just trying to, play with more urgency, play more competitively, and get after it a little more. But Derek Stingley got hurt later in the year, but in the 10 games he played, really did show some ability and show why he was worthy as one of the top corners. Trent McDuffie had a really nice first season with the Kansas City Chiefs. Tariq Woolen, too, further down this list. Tariq Woolen really burst on people's radar by the show he put on at the Combine, a guy that, with his size running in the 4.2s, really put him on the radar, and he really flashed some ability with the Seahawks this year. Roger McCreary, a guy that the Titans drafted, I think McCreary goes 2nd round. McCreary, a guy that I really liked his tape coming out of college. Didn't really have a lot of high-end traits, but a guy that when he played man-to-man coverage was just all over receivers. Did not allow a lot of separation, and a lot of that translated well to the with the Titans this past year as a rookie. So, good player. Marcus Jones taken by the Patriots. So yeah, pretty good class overall.